The fluorescent lights of the police station buzzed faintly above me as I sat hunched over in a hard plastic chair. My palms were clammy, my knees bouncing against the floor in a rhythm I couldn't control. On the desk in front of me, Detective Ruiz leaned toward the computer screen, rewinding the grainy footage frame by frame. There he was, Nathan, my brother, his familiar gait, his baseball cap tugged low, his jacket zipped all the way to his chin. The timestamp blinked Friday morning, 9 o'clock. I felt my breath catch when I saw him appear on the screen, walking directly toward my apartment door. He didn't hesitate. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a key, and slipped it into the lock. The door swung open without resistance. My chest tightened. That key was never meant for him. I'd given a spare set to my parents years ago, trusting they'd only use them for emergencies. Somehow, they'd found their way into Nathan's hands. The footage rolled on. He disappeared into my apartment for less than a minute. When he stepped back out, his hand clutched something small but unmistakable, my brand new iPhone 16 Pro Max. He glanced around casually, as if he were carrying groceries, then walked straight off camera. My throat felt dry. I pressed a hand to my mouth, trying to swallow the disbelief. I'd wanted to be wrong. I'd hoped I'd find my phone misplaced, or maybe sold by mistake to some stranger online. But there was no mistake here. My brother had stolen it. Detective Ruiz let the footage play out in silence before pausing it on Nathan's face. "That him?" he asked. I nodded, though my neck felt stiff. "Yes, that's Nathan Hensley, my brother." The words tasted bitter, like admitting to something shameful. Ruiz scribbled notes in his pad. "We'll need you to file a full report." "Do you have proof of purchase and registration for the device I reached into my purse?" Pulling out the receipt I'd carefully folded the day I brought the phone home. I'd been so proud, saving for months to buy something that finally felt like mine. Now it was evidence. Ruiz looked at me with steady eyes. "All right, we'll take it from here." I stared at the frozen image of Nathan on the screen, my chest heavy, and realized this wasn't just about a phone. This was about trust, about years of sacrifice, about a family line I hadn't thought could be crossed until now. And yet, I knew I had to start from the beginning, long before the footage at the station. I had been cast in a role I never auditioned for. Somewhere along the way, I became the one who always had to pick up the pieces when Nathan and Lydia fell short on rent. It was me they called. When the boys needed uniforms for soccer or money for a field trip, the requests came directly to my phone. Groceries, utility bills, even unexpected car repairs, it all seemed to circle back to me. At first, I told myself it was what any good sister would do. I had a steady job, no children, and the means to help. It felt like a way of proving my worth, of showing I was dependable. And whenever I wrote the checks or slipped cash into Lydia's hand, the relief on their faces gave me a fleeting sense of purpose. My parents encouraged it without ever saying the words outright. They praised me as the responsible one, the steady one, the daughter who could always be counted on. But behind that praise was an expectation so ingrained it became invisible. If Nathan struggled, I was supposed to step in. If Lydia asked, I was supposed to say yes. Over the years, I began to notice how invisible my own needs had become. Holidays meant me buying extra gifts so the children wouldn't feel deprived. Family dinners meant I quietly covered the bill without acknowledgement. And when I hinted at taking a vacation or saving for something of my own, the conversation always turned back to what Nathan's family needed. It was subtle at first, but the truth had been there all along. I wasn't seen as Clara, the sister, the daughter, the aunt. I was Clara, the wallet, the one who never complained, the one who always made sacrifices. That pattern held for years until the night at dinner when I finally broke it. The shift began with something as ordinary as my phone finally giving out. The screen had been cracked for months, the battery barely holding a charge. And yet, I kept using it because it still worked. When it finally shut down one morning and refused to turn back on, I almost felt relieved. Of course, my family turned it into a punchline. At the next dinner, Nathan laughed and said I was the only person he knew still walking around with a fossil. Lydia smirked and asked if I was trying to set a record for how long someone could cling to a broken device. Even my parents chimed in, suggesting I was just being cheap. I smiled and let them think what they wanted, the same way I always had. What none of them knew was that I had been planning for this moment. Every month, I had tucked away a little money, slowly building a fund for something that was entirely mine. No guilt, no obligations, no one else's needs attached, just a reward for my own discipline. When I walked into the store and asked for the iPhone 16 Pro Max, I felt a surge of pride I hadn't expected. The salesman read the total, and instead of reaching for financing or a credit card, I pulled out my checkbook. Signing my name across that slip of paper felt like claiming ownership not just of a phone, but of my effort, my patience, my independence. The moment I held it in my hand, sleek and flawless, a quiet thrill rushed through me. It wasn't about the technology. It was about proof that I could work toward something and keep it for myself. For once, I wasn't sacrificing or settling. Driving home that evening, I couldn't stop glancing at the box in the passenger seat. It was more than a device. It was a promise I had made to myself and finally kept. I had no idea how quickly that promise would be tested. By the time Saturday rolled around, I was almost giddy. Family dinners at my parents' house were a long-standing tradition, and for once, I had something I wanted to share. I tucked my new phone into my bag, not planning to brag, but hoping maybe just this once they might be happy for me. The kitchen was warm with the smell of pot roast when I arrived. My nephews were racing toy cars across the floor. While Mom fussed over side dishes, I slipped into my usual seat. And before long, conversation turned to the week. So, Clara, Dad said between bites, "Did you ever replace that old phone? Your mother said it finally died." I reached into my bag and set the iPhone on the table. The polished surface caught the light, and for a moment, there was silence. My nephew's eyes widened. "Whoa, Aunt Clara," Lucas said, leaning closer. "Does it do slow motion? Can you show me?" I laughed and unlocked the screen, showing them the camera features. Caleb giggled as I filmed a quick clip of him making faces, then replayed it in slow motion. Their laughter filled the room, and for the first time in a long time, I felt proud instead of defensive. Mom picked it up carefully, turning it over in her hands. "This is beautiful. Clara, you always make practical choices, but this, it's lovely." Dad nodded. "Smart investment." These things last. Their approval felt rare, almost fragile, and I held on to it for a moment. But then I noticed Nathan and Lydia. They weren't smiling. Nathan's jaw was tight, his eyes fixed on the phone. Lydia tilted her head, her lips curving into a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "A phone like this," she said, her voice syrupy, "really belongs with someone who can use it all day like a mom. There are so many things I could do with it." The warmth drained from my chest. I slid the phone back toward me, suddenly aware of the sharp shift in the room. What had started as pride now felt like a warning. The conversation that had drifted easily around the table snapped into silence when Nathan cleared his throat. He leaned back in his chair, arms folded, eyes still fixed on the phone sitting by my plate. "You know," he said, almost casually, "it makes more sense if Lydia has that phone." I blinked at him. Sure, I'd misheard. "Excuse me." He gestured toward his wife, who was dabbing her lips with a napkin, looking far too pleased. "You don't need it the way she does. Lydia's with the kids all day. She manages schedules, school apps, doctor's appointments. A phone like that would make her life easier. You, on the other hand, you just go to work and come home. You could manage with something simpler. Lydia's smile tightened, but she didn't protest. She let him speak for her, nodding slightly as if this was all perfectly reasonable. I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because I was stunned. Nathan, I just bought this phone. With my money. For myself. That's exactly the point. He pressed on. You can afford another one. Lydia can't. You've always helped us out before. Why should this be any different? I turned to my parents, expecting them to step in, to tell him how ridiculous he sounded. Instead, Mom sighed and said softly, Clara, you know she does have a lot on her plate. Maybe sharing would be the generous thing. Dad's voice followed, calm and reasonable, the way he'd always tried to settle disputes. Your brother isn't wrong. You're single. You have more flexibility. Lydia's raising a family. Doesn't it make sense for the resources to go where they're most needed? My face grew hot. It's not a resource. It's mine. I'm not giving it away just because you've decided she deserves it more. Lydia finally spoke, her tone sharp. You're being selfish. You've always had more than us. And now you're hoarding something you don't even need as much. I could use it for the kids' schooling, for doctor updates, for whatever you want. I cut in, but not with my phone. Buy your own. The room bristled with tension. Nathan's eyes narrowed. My parents looked wounded, and Lydia's mouth twisted into a pout that had always worked in her favor. But this time, I didn't bend. I slipped the phone back into my bag, gathered my plate, and stood up from the table, leaving their stunned silence behind me as I walked out. The morning after that dinner, my phone lit up before I'd even poured my coffee. First it was Mom, her voice unusually clipped. Clara, you need to think about what's best for everyone. Lydia is pregnant. Stress isn't good for her. Just let her have the phone. I ended the call without answering. Minutes later, Dad called, his tone almost scolding. You've always been the practical one. Don't make this into something ugly. She needs it more than you do. By noon, Lydia had started texting me directly, long paragraphs, full of dramatic pauses, about how much she juggled and how this one gesture could ease her burden. She sent ultrasound pictures, little captions about doing it for the baby. Nathan followed with shorter, sharper messages. You're tearing this family apart. Stop being selfish. It's just a phone. The words piled up, day after day. I silenced notifications. But even then, the vibration of the phone felt like a pulse of accusation in my pocket. It didn't stop with them. Aunt Caroline called from across the state, saying she'd heard about the situation and couldn't believe I'd deny Lydia something so helpful. My cousin left a voicemail suggesting I be the bigger person. It was as though the entire family tree had been recruited to shame me into compliance. I kept replaying the dinner in my head, wondering if I'd been too sharp, too defensive. For a moment, doubt wormed its way in. Maybe I should just let it go, replace the phone, keep the peace. But then I'd remember the hours of overtime, the years of restraint, the quiet pride I'd felt when I finally bought something for myself. That pride had been real, and it wasn't something I was willing to surrender. So I refused to answer their calls. I deleted their texts. When Mom showed up outside my apartment one evening, I didn't open the door. For once, I chose silence over surrender. The pressure didn't let up, but I held firm, even as the weight of their disappointment pressed harder each day. Then, one weekend, silence arrived, but not in the way I expected. I came back from a quick weekend trip feeling lighter than I had in weeks. A college friend had invited me to spend a couple of days in the city, and for once, I'd allowed myself the indulgence of laughter, good food, and hours spent without the constant vibration of family demands. Dragging my small suitcase into my apartment, I set it by the door and reached instinctively for my phone. The spot on the counter where I'd left it was empty. I checked my bag again, then the side table, then the bedroom, each search more frantic than the last. My pulse quickened as I tore through drawers, under cushions, even inside the fridge as if I might have placed it there absent-mindedly. But it was nowhere. A cold wave of realization hit me. Someone had taken it. I marched downstairs and knocked on Mr. Peterson's door. He was the building manager and had always been kind to me. One look at my face and he opened his office. "Check the cameras," I said, my voice barely steady. We scrolled through the weekend footage until Friday morning came into view. My breath caught in my throat as the image sharpened Nathan, walking straight to my apartment door. He pulled a key from his pocket, unlocked the door, and slipped inside like he belonged there. Less than a minute later, he emerged, my phone in his hand. I gripped the edge of the desk, my nails digging into the wood. The violation sank deeper than the theft itself. He hadn't just taken my phone, he'd used the spare keys I'd trusted my parents with years ago. Keys meant for emergencies, now twisted into a weapon against me. I pressed my hand to my chest, struggling to breathe. I wasn't just angry. I felt exposed, unsafe in my own home. I asked Mr. Peterson to save a copy of the footage. Then I stood there in the dim light of his office. Knowing I couldn't ignore it this time, I had to confront them. I barely remembered the drive over, my hands clenched so tightly around the steering wheel that my knuckles burned. When I pulled up to Nathan's house, there it was my phone, glowing through the living room window as if mocking me. I marched up the steps and pounded on the door. Nathan opened it, looking almost amused. Behind him, Lydia sat on the couch, my iPhone in her hand. She tilted it toward me, the case I had picked out gleaming under the lamp. "It's ours now," she said smoothly, sliding her finger across the screen. "You wouldn't share. So we had to make the choice for you." My chest tightened. "You stole it. You broke into my home." Nathan stepped forward, his voice steady, almost rehearsed. "No. Clara, we took what should have been given. You don't need something like this. Lydia does. She's raising kids, keeping this family together, while you live alone with nothing to worry about. Family deserves it more than you do." Lydia smirked. "Besides, everyone agrees with us. Even Mom and Dad said you should help." I stared at them both, rage coursing through me. They weren't ashamed. They weren't even trying to deny it. They believed they were entitled. "Give me back my phone," I said, my voice low. Nathan chuckled, shaking his head. "You won't do anything. You won't risk dragging family through the mud over a piece of technology. You've always been too scared of conflict." Lydia leaned back, laughing softly as if I'd just told a joke. "Go ahead, Clara. Try us." Their confidence was suffocating. But as I turned to leave, gripping the footage on the USB in my pocket, I knew exactly what I had to do next. The next morning, I walked into the police station with the footage in hand and a knot in my stomach. Detective Ruiz greeted me calmly, ushering me into his office. I slid the USB across the desk, and he plugged it in without a word. Nathan's figure appeared on the screen, unlocking my door, disappearing inside, and emerging with my phone. "That's your brother Ruiz asked." I nodded, my voice steady despite the tremor inside me. "Yes, and that's my phone." He studied the paperwork I'd brought receipt, warranty, registration, and nodded. "This is enough. We'll move forward with theft charges." Hearing those words brought a mix of relief and sorrow. It felt necessary, but it also felt like drawing a line I could never erase. Later that afternoon, Ruiz called me back to the station. My parents were there, pacing in the lobby, their faces red with fury. Mom rushed at me, gripping my arm. "Clara, you can't do this. He's your brother. You're tearing this family apart." Dad's voice thundered behind her. "Drop the charges now!" How could you drag your own blood into court over a phone? Their pleas didn't sting anymore. They sounded hollow, rehearsed. I met their eyes and spoke clearly. "I'll drop the charges under one condition: you leave me alone. No calls, no visits, no messages, nothing. I want no part in this family anymore." Mom gasped like I'd slapped her. Dad shook his head in disbelief, but I didn't waver. When Ruiz returned with the paperwork, I signed. The charges were dropped, but so was every tie I had left. That night, I drove home in silence, the weight of finality pressing down, knowing the quiet that followed would change everything. Months slipped by in a strange, almost unfamiliar calm. The silence that once felt like punishment now settled around me like a blanket. My phone no longer lit up with guilt-soaked texts or endless missed calls. For the first time in years, my evenings belonged only to me. Work became easier without the constant weight of family emergencies pressing at my back. I went out with friends without worrying if I'd come home to another crisis. Slowly, I began to feel lighter, as though I'd been carrying stones in my pockets and had finally set them down. One afternoon, my Aunt Caroline called from an unfamiliar number. When I answered, her voice was careful, almost coaxing. "Clara, honey, your mother wanted me to tell you Lydia had the baby, a little girl. Don't you want to see pictures? Maybe it's time to move past all this." I closed my eyes, listening to the same refrain I'd heard 100 times before. "No," I said softly but firmly. "I don't want to see them. I don't want to be pulled back into the same cycle. I meant what I said. I'm done." There was a pause, then a sigh. Before she hung up, the quiet that followed didn't feel like loss. It felt like strength. That evening, I sat on my couch, unlocked my iPhone, and scrolled through the photos I'd taken since cutting ties, laughing with friends, sunsets on walks, snapshots of moments that belonged only to me. The phone wasn't just a device anymore. It was a reminder that I could choose myself, even when others tried to strip that choice away, and each time I touched the screen, I knew I'd never go back.